Hello everyone. In today's episode, we will explore the evolving intersection of AI-generated content and election integrity. We are joined by three experts. Tanya Janca, aka SheHacksPurple. She's the best-selling author of Alice and Bob Learn Application Security and Cards Against AppSec. She has won countless awards, spoken all over the planet, and is a prolific blogger. Judith Tsai. She is a cybersecurity head, CISO, and SecDevOps specialist who's worked at small startups to Fortune 1 company, most recently at Roblox. She currently advises several startups, is a board member for Bay Area CSO Council, and LP with Rain Capital. Our third guest is Nick Judd. He is a digital safety researcher. He is currently a lead research engineer at the Digital Safety Research Institute at UL Research Institutes. His research interests range from information integrity to privacy and cybersecurity. Our guest will help us understand how deepfakes and misinformation campaigns are shaping public perception and the act of voting. We'll discuss the impacts of declining trust, the rise of extremism, and how tech companies, governments, and citizens can navigate and counter these threats to democracy. Let's jump right in. So, how has the rise of deepfakes and AI-generated content impacted the way that elections are being seen by the voters?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things that you see when you look at what people say about how they are, what resources they're going to, where they're looking for information about elections, and kind of how they understand what they're looking at as they kind of navigate the internet, trying to figure out what's going on, is people don't really trust information that they get from AI systems on matters of importance. In general, people kind of understand that they need to take everything that they see on the internet with a grain of salt, and especially things that may have been generated by AI. Overall, we're also seeing kind of over the last few years, there has been declining trust in media, declining trust in information people find online on important matters. And the kind of early signs are that AI is accelerating that sense of a declining trust.
So when you threat model an election, the two main important things are that every single person who has the right to vote is able to vote. And ideally, it's as easy as possible for them to vote. And then the second thing is that the public overall feel confident in the results of the election. Those are the two main biggest threats. The two most important things. And so threats to those, especially to both, are voter suppression and misinformation. And so what is a deepfake? It is basically, it is misinformation in action. And then deepfakes can be used to essentially either scare people into not voting, which is voter suppression, trick them into not voting, voter suppression, fool them into voting a different day, voter suppression, fool them into thinking the election results cannot be trusted, etc. And so I feel like it is a new and improved weapon that has been being used against democracy and elections for many years, and it's scary. Scary.
So can deepfake suppress voter sentiment or rather create artificial grassroots movements?
I can go first. I mean, one of the things that I and others have seen is one of the things that people think that a misinformation campaign, the primary outcome might be someone believes something that isn't true. And, that's obviously something that someone who is running such a campaign would like. But another thing that it does is makes people unsure. You ask people if, if if an event that everyone knows happened, if it did in fact happen, and someone who's been exposed to a message casting doubt on, for instance, the integrity of an election, will express uncertainty. They're not sure, they don't know. So one of the kind of, I think, key effects at the individual level of these kinds of campaigns is exactly that lack of certainty about things that should be really kind of clear and obvious, or can be easily verified. The kind of happy thing is exposing people to communication from other folks who, have that kind of verification, who can say, well, no, actually, like, here's some evidence, or let me explain to you the context for this message, or let me explain to you the context around what actually happened. People are receptive to that, and it can dramatically reduce uncertainty. We can see AI messages kind of inciting people or suppressing people, but we can also see ways to counter that.
Yeah, I would suggest that AI here is an added tool to the tool set of, what are these primal motivations that can happen in election cycles, right? And to what Tanya was saying about, like impacting behavior, I always like to recast this idea that perception creates reality, because I actually don't believe that's exactly right. What I do think is that perception drives behavior. Behavior creates reality. And because of the way that people will perceive what that reality is, whether their candidate is up or down, whether it is futile to go out and vote, whether or not it might be dangerous to go out and vote, people can distort certain kinds of messages to, drive behaviors with people who feel like they're not sure, if it's safe to vote, or like if it's going to make a difference for them to do so.
I feel like AI is a tool that can be used for good or for evil, the same as a hammer. So a hammer can be used to build a shed. A hammer can be used to hurt someone or hurt yourself by accident. And I feel all of those things apply to AI. And I feel like deepfakes could be used for humor or parody or other things like that, but it's more often used as a form of misinformation. I think that we are going to see a lot of creativity in this election because so America is a very big country, and America is a very powerful country, like financially powerful, military powerful. I live in Canada, and I love my country, but we are politically irrelevant in many ways. We're financially irrelevant in many ways. I'm being honest. I'm not trying to be like self-deprecating. Like, it's true. Like, if all of Canada's like, we're boycotting this, everyone's like, no one cares. Because we're not as big and as powerful. And so I think that there's a lot more different groups and nation states paying extraordinarily close attention and wanting to influence the outcome of the election in America compared to the threats that Canada faces. Also, luckily for Canada, our election cycle is very close to yours this time. When I was the CISO for the election, we were opposite to you. And all the folks that do voter suppression as a job came across the border. We saw them. We're like, oh no. And so I'm really glad they're all busy, totally busy and occupied with your election instead of ours. Sorry.
When it comes to, I guess one of the things that I might add is just kind of you're asking, can deepfakes or AI, create astroturf movements? And when I hear that, what I think about is how might a deepfake persuade someone or motivate someone to join a movement that they have kind of been deceived into thinking exists. And the way that works is, as I think a lot of people, I know everyone here is probably familiar with this, but maybe we should just put it out there again. When people are receiving a message, when they're trying to understand something that's being communicated to them, people are busy. Your brain is doing many different things at once. And one of the kind of heuristics that people use to decide whether they need to sit down and really, whether you need to really process and devote the resources and attention to really absorbing something that you're being told is, does this fit with how I understand the world already? That could be a kind of a rational, it could be ideological, it could even just be emotional. And people are more likely to just process or accept information that aligns with their priors. So this kind of raises the question that Julie brought up, that perception drives behavior. When you see deepfakes out in the world and you think, well, who will this motivate? There's this open question about, well, exactly who will this motivate? Is this going to motivate people who wouldn't already be supporting these kinds of points of view? That sometimes yes, and that brings up interesting questions about what kinds of messages, what kinds of fabricated messages are particularly effective, and that's where you can start to drill down into questions about like what sorts of content should people be looking out for.
Right. So we spoke about these tools and this campaign and this way of using AI. Can we dig a little bit about the type of disinformation campaign that are most likely to be used? Like, can we discuss the array of different ways it could be used?
I feel like they're becoming a lot more advanced in the way they're doing things, because I remember in 2015 when we were preparing for the election, we looked at some of the past things that we'd seen specifically used in the United States. Canadian culture is different. We have problems. Our problems are, some are the same, some are different, right? In the South, there was a bunch of signs that I guess we had collected where it was like, if you vote for this party and you show up without ID, we'll put you in jail and we'll put your kids in jail. Yeah. And these were real signs that have been put around Black neighborhoods in the South of America, the United States. And there are things like, Democrats vote on this day, Republicans vote on that day. That's not how that works. And of course, the day that the party they did not want them to vote for was the day after election day, right? And so those are super advanced. Like a smart, educated person's not going to fall for that, but not everyone's smart and educated, and everyone gets to vote in a democracy, right? That's the whole thing. Whether you went through the public school system, whether you dropped out in grade 5, it doesn't matter. If you're an adult, you are allowed to vote. And so not everyone's coming at this at the same scale. And so like with deepfakes, for instance, you could deepfake a whole bunch of authorities saying, oh yeah, this party's totally so in the lead, it's such a landslide. It doesn't even matter if any of those people come to vote. It's not going to happen, blah, blah, blah. Right. And then a lot of people don't vote because they think their party's not going to win. They're like, oh, I'm a red state, we always vote red, and I'm a blue voter, or vice versa, whichever. We have more parties. We have more than 2 parties in Canada, but only 2 of them usually win. The third one just votes and wins in BC, which is where I live. And then the Green Party's just like, hi, we're green, we still exist. And they get their 1 seat. But I feel like they're getting a lot more advanced, a lot more interesting, and a lot more scary. What do you think, Julie?
Yeah, I think that the potential of the deep fakes, especially with being able to fake really convincing video and audio, is to give people, perhaps give people the idea that, we saw recently there were several cases of fake endorsements, right, by celebrities. And some of them were just sort of creatively patched together videos that just skated this line of like, so-and-so supporters support, so-and-so. And like, you could say like, okay, they really like split the hair on that one in terms of being, grabbing things that were true online, but not the inference that that particular celebrity supported them. And so I think that it is demanding a lot more of us as a population in terms of reading between the lines on a message, and also looking at the source, like internalizing some of these core, old journalism principles about the credibility of the source, and figuring out whether or not the person is disinterested. We had an ideal a long time ago about objectivity around an issue, and we know that that's almost impossible for humans, but there should be an effort to be so. And at a minimum, not to be paid by the other side, or not to gain something explicitly from, what's there. And so I think that a lot of what it comes back to is being able to, discern those things. There's some really great videos and blog posts by Tom Cross and some other folks in that area of the nonprofit world who are talking about, having like us as a population really being vigorous in our analysis of these things. And I think that's a lot of what's being demanded here. But as you mentioned, some of those tactics about your candidate's not going to win, or this is the wrong place to vote, or in nowadays maybe some of the more recent things might be, hey, the whole thing's rigged. You shouldn't bother anyway. And a lot of that, like once you dig into it and peel back the layers, you realize actually there's been a lot of efforts to make these things more sturdy, right? There's a organization called Verified Voting that for 20 years is trying to ensure that there are paper trails on all of the on all the voting procedures in the U.S. And they say actually 98% of the voting in this general election there will be a paper ballot involved, so it can be tracked back. So there's the kinds of things that are being used to scare people preemptively about what's reliable and what's true. People should take with a healthy grain of salt.
Just to follow on to that, a couple of things that came up from that conversation. I really like that the point you made, Julie, about understanding credibility and thinking about the source of information. And one kind of nice source is a source that's disinterested. I think another kind of nice source is a source that is at least forthright about its interests and who is being represented. So understanding kind of the provenance of content, the provenance of a message, understanding the standpoint of an author, even if it's someone who has kind of skin in the game, so to speak. So long as people are kind of forthright and faithful about disclosing what their interests are. That's kind of in keeping with a long political tradition and a long tradition in journalism going back to when we had a highly partisan press.
I love that point, like an honest subjectivity, right?
Mm-hmm. Or at a minimum, more forthright.
Transparent.
Tanya also said something that I learned something recently about cybersecurity that I didn't know, and it kind of goes to something you said, Tanya, about people maybe not necessarily having the capacity to see through a campaign or a message intended to deceive them. I didn't realize exactly how vulnerable educated and kind of intelligent, sophisticated people are to kind of really low-level social engineering, to like basic phishing campaigns. The reason why I thought that was interesting is because it's very similar in political messaging. The kind of susceptibility doesn't necessarily come from education or intellect. It comes from a kind of a background in the specific subject matter. It comes from where you are in that given moment, what kind of other messages you've seen recently, what you're primed to agree or disagree with. And also just kind of your level of attention, how much you actually care about a given subject, or how much you already know. Very intelligent people can be duped, so to speak. And people with a low level of education might see straight through things that, someone burdened with an overabundance of schooling would fall for.
Yeah, intelligence comes in all packages.
Yes. On top of that, though, since COVID, we've seen quite a rise in extremism online, and we've seen quite a rise of people who have some pretty extreme beliefs. Extremism across like the entire planet. And extremism in places I would never have thought of. And people previously might have kept like a lot of thoughts to themselves because they know they're not politically correct or whatnot. And now they're like, I'm going to just shout that from the rooftop. Like I'll run up to someone wearing a mask in public and scream in their face that I don't want them to do that. And it's like, they're not making you wear one. But maybe they have the flu and they're trying not to give it to you. Do you know what I mean? And a lot of things have changed since COVID. And I feel like people are a lot more open to believing things that they would not have been open to believing before, especially older folks, like parents. A lot of people my age, their parents, believing very extreme things. And As an example, in Canada, I don't know if you heard about the trucker rally that we had, and a lot of the truckers were very upset about COVID rules, and they went and they protested around Ottawa. It was actually all organized by an American right-wing extremist group that was trying to perform a coup to get Trudeau voted out. That's what was actually happening. And lots of the truckers are just like, but man, I don't like vaccines and I don't like masks. And that's what they thought they were there for. But it was like, no, actually all that money and how you're not able to go to work for weeks at a time and you are still getting this check from someone magically, it was a right-wing group that was all centered in the United States. And so there's a lot of groups that are enabling less informed people to hold certain opinions and to speak out about them more. And like once they finally figured out what was happening, they're like, what? And a lot of the truckers were really surprised and embarrassed. And I do think that their opinions matter and that they should still be heard, right? And we're a democracy and that's how that stuff works, right? And I still think that they have the right to protest if they want to. But they did not realize that there was a coup planned. And I don't think that they might have been involved as such if they had known. And so I feel like there's a lot of background things happening that people don't always understand that they're participating in. And that's another thing that, because you're talking about grassroots, like that is grassroots. It's not what I would love grassroots to be. I'd rather grassroots be like, hey, let's help poor people or whatever. But yeah, so we're seeing a lot more extremist behavior and we're seeing a lot more people believing things that they would not have believed before COVID quite openly.
So we spoke a lot about the voter persona. Now let's speak about another actor, which are tech companies, which may enable or at least help to spread these campaigns. So what can tech companies do to protect the voters from deepfakes and really any of these misinformation campaigns?
They could be responsible for their own platforms.
Yeah, that's why.
They're just my users. It's not my fault. It's not like I created this platform where I just let them do this. Facebook had a group of people that were fans of rape. And all these women were like, take that down. And they're like, oh, it's not our fault. Yeah, no, it's literally our take that shit down. And it took like quite a few letters to get them to take that down. And the group was huge. There were many people that were fans of it, apparently. And like the fact that like an act of violence, that it can have a fan page in the first place, and that Facebook's like, oh, well, it's not our fault, and like freedom of expression. And I'm like, so I feel like what can tech companies do? I think maybe it's more like what can the government force tech companies to do? Because they're there to make money. They're beholden to their investors. And I think that there's a lot of people that are like, I'm just doing my job and just raking in lots of money.
I'm going to say that I believe firmly in the need for the health of the ecosystem and the role of the government in that. Knowing the sort of the culture and the mindset of Silicon Valley, I think that there will be probably a lot of more like quicker compliance with incentives, because it kind of aligns with that kind of Western libertarian kind of view of like how to manage technology. That said, there's definitely needs to be civic responsibility on this, and I would much prefer that the powerful actors like step up to that willingly, you know. And I think that two of the things that come to mind immediately with this are, first of all, education of the general audience of what's possible. It's interesting when playing around with some of these things and the image generation. I noticed that, you know, part of what they've attempted to do is block out the capability of at least amateur or casual generation of, you know, political images with AI content. You can get a little bit, get somewhere with one or two of them, and then they'll quickly start saying, well, we don't generate political images if you start, you know, putting in names of like leading candidates' names. Now, that said, I think what actually is going to end up happening is that it's going to restrict more of the usage of that to the more funded and sophisticated players that can generate these things in-house, not just use those services. So it's not going to necessarily get rid of that occurrence of like using AI generated images for, for fun and profit, but it's going to kind of separate out like who gets to do that actively. The casual user will do it less, right? But I think that if they're going to do that because they want to probably have a little less liability in this area, like at least educate the users on, hey, what is possible now with this is you can now get a pretty close facsimile on someone's, video live movement and inject them into a scene, just like you see in the movies. There's plenty of examples of it. And I think also maybe something along the lines of, how there are rules around announcing things like campaign donations and like movements in money. Maybe what needs to happen is some sort of public visibility into power users of AI generated content, whether it's companies or organizations, so that people are aware, hey, such and such organizations are using a lot of our GPUs on AI, and you can draw your own conclusions.
I've kind of been dreading this subject, which we kind of discussed in advance. The reason why is because when I was thinking about the answers that I would have, all of them are things that really, in order to work for this, this election in the U.S., that would have had to, initiatives that would have had to have started 6 months ago or earlier, right? I mean,
yeah,
the kind of this tanker is already at full steam, and turning it is gonna turning it now is kind of an operation.
And this is almost always the case, right, with technological development. In order to get the trust in this, the trustworthiness and safety, like it's there's always sort of a lagging accomplishment.
And I mean, in a platform company, these kinds of conversations do kind of start fairly far in advance, and they're also kind of on a rolling basis because, as I think everyone here is aware, I mean, the U.S. general federal election is one of just a staggeringly large number of quite important elections in democratic countries across the world that's happening this year. So, on a rolling basis, the lessons you learn from one election, you might turn around and apply incrementally to the next election that's upcoming, but it's like these are things that are just always going. I think there are some things that folks at platform companies are already aware of, like pre-bunking, which is, on facts where you can generally get consensus that this is, we understand how things generally work, and we understand the kinds of easily understood as factually wrong, like claims that people are going to make about this thing. We're going to put it out there that so like you are going to hear this sort of argument, and it's a specious argument. It's just clearly wrong. Here's a little bit of additional context that'll make it clear. You're going to see it, and when you see it, you're going to already know. Something else that folks are talking about, and I think that there should be more of, is authentication and watermarking. I mean, you see a lot of conversations internally at companies that are doing generative AI about watermarking content, so that folks will know that something is generated by AI. There's also a lot to be said for being able to authenticate something that was kind of generated by a human without AI, to have some understanding of the kind of supply chain for information, when the ability to verify that kind of supply chain, every link on that chain can be verified as having had, for instance, something that information that was, an image that you can verify has not been doctored. There are initiatives like that kind of out there in the world now, and I think their acceleration, they need to be refined. Adoption should continue. There's a lot of work to do on these things before they're really kind of ready for prod, as we would say. But I think that's kind of a core. That's a core element.
So we spoke about a lot of problem there are some solutions, but ultimately what's very important is to regain the trust of voters, right? Like, how can we help them to believe and trust in the system that's in place? So how can we do this, Nick?
Happily, Pew Research Center recently came out with something on this and pointed out that something like 73% of registered voters think that they're confident that elections will be run somewhat or very well. So it's, depending on how you slice that, that's almost 3/4 of voters. So that's good. But that means, more than 1/4 of Americans have some sort of reservation with the process. Some things that I've kind of seen to be effective are people talking to each other and people kind of learning more about both who is involved in the process of election administration. I mean, poll observers, poll workers historically have been kind of just interested citizens, just civic-minded people. And you kind of get a lot out of the experience of going to a polling place and seeing a Democratic poll watcher and a Republican poll watcher, handing each other pens and passing each other clipboards and kind of cooperating to administer an election. So to the extent to which people can actually have the lived experience of voting and participating in something that is less partisan and more civic, and could hear about that firsthand from their friends, their family, people that they know, that is good, and would be effective. The messages that do the most for people kind of always come from not just people like them, but people who they already know.
We run things differently in Canada than the United States. So we have paper ballots and we do have computers that count them. But when we count the ballots for the federal election, we invite one or more representatives from every party to be in the room and several members of the media. So there'll often be like 30 people in the room as everything's being counted. And then we keep the actual physical votes, like the ballots, for the whole time that the person's in power. And so then we also, if it's even close at all, we do a recount. And then again, if there's any questions, we just count it again. And we just invite everyone to be in the room. And so when we announce who won, everyone already knows because all of the media's already reported it long before we've even finished counting, because it's like, well, there's only like this many thousand ballots left. So it's very obvious who's won at this point, right? But I haven't worked at Elections Canada in a few years now, but they report it after everyone else already knows and the public all already knows. And so there's not always enough people to be in the room for every single, because we have 336 ridings, I believe, or maybe 338 now. And so there's not always a lot of people from each party, and there's not always a lot of people in every room, but they're all invited and welcome. But usually what happens is there's certain ridings where we're like, oh, who's going to win that one? And then there's a lot more people in that room, sometimes up to 50 people as they're counting. And so the transparency is the thing that I find helps the most. Being transparent as much as you can throughout the entire thing without ruining the security of it. And I know that that's not as fast and it's not as efficient, but having everyone just agree and not sling it out for weeks and weeks is less stressful.
Mm-hmm. So how Georgia Supreme Court decision against the hand counting of the ballot may affect public trust?
So that particular, recently, there was a case in Georgia. The Georgia Supreme Court struck down some new provisions that had a few things. One of which was requiring the hand count of that ballot, but also including things like needing to review all of the documentation that was created during the conduct of the elections prior to that, as well as requiring a reasonable inquiry into the elections before certifying them. So there were a bunch of things that were bundled together in that the Democrats in Georgia had said, hey, this is going to gunk things up too much. We don't have enough, process and people to manage this. But one of those things that got knocked down was this idea of like hand counting the ballots, which in itself is not bad. I think that the comparison with Canada is really interesting, especially because Canada has one central sort of oversight over the elections, whereas we are that republic of like 50 states all doing it in slightly different ways. And so all of the smaller down ballot elections like Secretary of State and like all the state legislatures start to become really important in terms of how each state executes these things. So that was what happened in Georgia. And in that particular case, Republicans are saying, we're appealing that decision. We think those rules should stand.
I think there are kind of two considerations that come to mind when I think about that situation and when I think about calls to, for instance, do hand counts or recounts in election administration across the country. I think, as Julie mentioned, election administration is an extremely local thing in the United States. And elections administrators don't always have the best resources. It's really kind of impressive when you start to hear about these folks who are running elections in general. It's their kind of commitment to just making sure that everyone's voice is heard is by and large just really admirable. So there's two considerations here. On the one hand, there's the consideration of wanting to just make sure that everything is right. I mean, you could see how there's an argument for wanting to make sure that everything's been hand counted, everything's been double checked. But as Tanya already mentioned, something that really does a lot for democratic process is running elections swiftly and coming to a quick understanding where there's room for a quick understanding, coming to know there's a very clear winner in 90 of 100 races, and there's 10 races where maybe a hand count is necessary. When you think about the resources required to run something like a hand recount, it's a very expensive, time-intensive process. There's a real balance to be struck there between the need to make sure everything is correct and the need to come to a swift decision. I think where AI factors into that is the longer there's this kind of uncertainty in the public conversation and the longer there are open questions, there's more opportunity for interested parties to introduce ideas or claims in that conversation that maybe aren't verifiable or just aren't supported by fact. So I think these are some things that I think of when I think of kind of that story and other stories around election administration and around understanding the outcomes of an election.
Yeah, and what Tanya had mentioned about the foreign influence piece, the proliferation of social movements on the internet, whether grassroots or AstroTurf, as well as the tools that are available, has also enabled individuals and small organizations all over the world to be able to become kind of superpowered in that way, right? So I think to Nick's point about what you can do with an ambiguity in that timeline, there's a lot more mischief that can be done in a short amount of time with the tools that are available than might have been possibly in previous generations.
So we are actually almost done with the US election for 2024. Now, if we look forward for the next election in 2028, what do you think are going to be the challenges and perhaps a tool or put in place to counter these challenges? How do you see the next election happening? Tanya?
That's a really good question. I feel like between now and then, there's going to be some big changes in the way that we use technology, not only because there always is changes in that amount of time, but because I think that AI is going to change things a lot, hopefully for the better, mostly. I suspect that, or how about this? I hope that there's going to be less extremism. I hope we're going to be able to meet in the middle a lot more often. I hope that the parties are going to be able to get along a lot better. And have more ways that we work together. And so when there's an election, maybe it could be less jarring and there could be a lot less wants to have voter suppression and other things, because when you vote for one party versus the other, you're not getting the polar opposite. It's actually closer. But that's a wish and a dream. So, yeah. Anyone else?
I think there are a couple of big challenges. And AI poses actually some opportunities for both of them. I think one of the biggest challenges in our current moment now is there's some studies that have come out that show, people just consistently overestimate the bad intention of people who aren't like them, politically speaking. People consistently overestimate the willingness of sort of the other side to resort to violence in particular. And when you expose people to information about how, actually folks who, have a different party affiliation, they kind of share your distaste for political violence. They're only wound up because they think you're wound up. And just kind of starting that conversation, exposing people to just basic messages already kind of starts to move the needle on what you might say lowering the temperature. I think there's also, some studies coming out that are showing AI in its ability to kind of summarize and rephrase text, which is, you don't need it to keep track of facts, which we haven't seen large language models do very well yet. But just summarizing text and recharacterizing things. You've seen some promise for these systems to help people understand different points of view, to help people communicate more clearly by kind of passing that language through through a sort of filter that renders it less objectionable to folks who don't think the way you do.
It's interesting.
It can help people reframe and communicate what they're trying to say in a way that it can be received in the way it is intended. There are other ways in which large language models and other kinds of AI systems can help us identify consensus in scalable ways, and we're just seeing kind of green shoots of that at the moment. There's nothing, there's very little kind of at production scale that's really kind of doing the thing and can be counted on at a critical juncture. But we see these opportunities, and there are, happily, there's more every day. And I think the real challenge is taking these opportunities and kind of accelerating them and using them to build new systems and institutions, that can meet the kind of the challenges of making democracy work at the kind of scale and complexity of modern society.
I love that point that Nick just made about using that facet of AI, the depersonalized aspect of it, in our favor, right? Like, so much of the conversation around AI is about how to make it more human. We'll use the fact that it is a machine, hopefully without preferences, but at least emotional preferences. There might be algorithmic preferences, but without any heat to it that can, perhaps cool down some of the language around things and get people to consider things in a different way. That would be a fantastic outcome for that. I agree that it is early days, that a lot of the things that we're thinking like, oh, it would have been great if we had that, maybe in the next 4 years, we'll see some of those evolutions of the expectations of users to be able to identify AI-generated content, to expect that just like you would like a food labeling on a can, like when you go to the grocery store. To be able to, decide what is a credible source versus not. Some of the things that, psychologists as well as, technology and social scientists have been looking at is people's tendency to look just for the things that validate what they think. Maybe this is a chance for being able to get more of those, mushy, middle, moderate opinions to surface more rather than just the sharp edges that come out online so much. There was a line a long time ago from Margaret Thatcher about how like each political party had a right wing and a left. It was like a bird. They had a right wing and a left wing, and the head and the heart were in the center. And maybe that's something that can be brought out a little bit more with a tool that is meant to aggregate opinions.
Super. Tanya, Julie, Nick, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for
Tanya.
having
Thank you,
us.
Nick.
Thank you. Yeah, real pleasure to speak with you. Thanks very much.